The Mavericks are exactly 500 through 30 games, this after being a 52-win team last year, and after they supposedly improved in the offseason. And I think these failures as a team, combined with the lack of assets that they have, could be a pretty serious sign that Luka Doncic is not going to be a Dallas Maverick by the end of his current contract. Before we get into today's video, I want to talk about our sponsor, Prize Picks, the best daily fantasy app out there. The best thing about this app to me is, as someone who is pretty unfamiliar with the daily fantasy space, just how accessible it is. You pick a player and look at their projected stats by Prize Picks and choose whether or not you think they will get more or less of that stat. You take 3 to 5 of those players, set it to where you have to get all 5 of them correct and you get a max payout, or you can do a flex play and maybe make a little bit less money if you get all of them correct, but still come out in the positive if you get 1 or 2 of them wrong. The platform is super easy to navigate. You can make entries in 60 seconds or less, and while I will be sticking to the NBA side of things, there are also projections offered for the NFL, MLB, NHL, esports, NASCAR, and the list goes on. And what's great for you is that if you have not downloaded Prize Picks already, first-time users that use my code RUSTY will get a 100% instant deposit match up to $100. So if you put in $50, you'll have $100 to play with, and so on. Also, they have a promotion going on right now for the end of the month called Pickmas, so if you want some more opportunities and promotions, those will be available as well. This is the perfect time to get in on Prize Picks. So click the link in the description to download Prize Picks and use code RUSTY to double your deposit up to $100. Thank you to Prize Picks for sponsoring this video, and let's get on with it. Now, I have actually kind of made this video before, probably like 2 times previous to this, where I've talked about the fact that Luka's future in Dallas is just not particularly secure. And I have been harping on the point that the window, the time frame that you have to actually mitigate this issue is a lot smaller than the Dallas Mavericks seem to be treating it. Now, Luka did sign a max extension as I predicted, because pretty much everyone takes that max money, and he is on the first year of that now super max deal. So I would not expect him to ask out soon by any means, but let's say halfway through the 2024-25 season, the Mavericks are yet again nothing special. I think it would make sense for him at that point to ask out, and that is not a time period that's really that far away. Presuming that that is true, you have exactly the rest of this season, next season, and like half of the following one to convince Luka to want to stick around. After that, there is a real chance you are screwed. Now, of course, neither you nor I know what's really inside Luka's head. Maybe he does have more patience than that, but, you know, the guy definitely wears his emotions on his sleeve, and his body language suggests that he is already kind of tired of this. But let's say you do well enough to convince Luka to not get to the point of asking for a trade by that point. Even then, you still have to guarantee that you put a roster that is worthy of him re-signing for 2027. Obviously, that's almost, actually it's damn near just 4 years from now. But the midway point, which is very well an area where I could see him getting frustrated, you have to survive that first, then there's this next hurdle, and then after that maybe you can take a breather if he's re-signed. That said, I truly do think that Luka getting frustrated and wanting out about halfway through his max contract is probably the most realistic ways that this goes, unless, again, the Mavericks do something to change that trajectory. The problem with all of this is I'm just not sure that the Mavericks have the assets to take the leaps necessary to get that far. They have Josh Green, who is 22 and shooting 44% from 3, so he's a decent asset. And after this year's pick goes to the New York Knicks, assuming that the Mavericks do not finish in the top 10 in the lottery, which is more than likely not going to happen, that means that they will have their picks going forward, and the Stepien rule is no longer in the way, so they can trade their first round picks as they see fit, and they have the rest of their picks going forward. So they do have a lot of draft capital, but A, Those picks are not going to be great because Luka is going to prevent them from being lottery level picks, so they don't have a crazy amount of value. The only picks that would have a crazy amount of value are the ones you would trade after Luka could theoretically be gone, but then at that point you don't want to have those picks gone because then you don't have Luka and you don't have the draft capital to try and rebuild a new team with him gone. So you add in the fact that those picks are probably not substantial, it makes you wonder what kind of, like, if you're trying to pair some other star player next to Luka, what really quality of star player are you really going to get with like 3 good first round picks, maybe 4? Another big issue for me, and where I think a lot of people are going to comment this on the video, is that like they made the conference finals last year. What's the big deal? Well, the thing is, even the way that they made the conference finals last year made me fairly uneasy. It was very much a Luka does everything type run, and that's really the crux of all of this. It is always Luka does everything. It's that way in the regular season, and it's even further amplified in the playoffs. The only thing his teammates do is play defense and hit open threes, which is valuable, but ultimately it's role player stuff. When Luka isn't there to set them up, their lack of creation ability becomes painfully obvious. Seriously, I'm begging you, watch this year's Mavericks and watch literally anybody try to do anything creation-wise outside of Spencer Dinwiddie, Christian Wood, and like sometimes Tim Hardaway Jr. But in general, whether they're trying to create for themselves, whether they're trying to create for others, it just gets ugly. They don't understand how to play make, they don't understand how to create space for their own offense, and it's really bad. Mind you that in today's league, we're getting to the point where teams are so talented that it's very common for multiple teams to have multiple 20-plus point per game scores. Meanwhile, the Mavericks can't even get one guy to score 20. They can only have one guy average 33. There were just 2 players who could create outside of Luka on the team that made the conference finals last year, those 2 being Dinwiddie and Jalen Brunson. Jalen is gone now, which I think they're feeling quite a bit. And Spencer is cool, and he's having a fine season statistically, but if your second best creator is a 16-5 guy, that is not ideal. And this isn't just me making the heliocentrism argument that I've always made in the past, because frankly, I do believe that system can go further than I originally gave it credit for. I still have my doubts that you can win a championship with a heliocentric offense, but I do think it's very well possible to go at least as far as the conference finals because, well, they did. The problem is not necessarily that the offense very often revolves around Luka Doncic, it's that that's the only option, like ever. If you try and run things that do not have Luka involved, it always comes back as pretty much a negative offensive set. Even if it works occasionally, overall, the offense without Luka is pitiful. And really, I just want to highlight how ridiculous how much he has to do is in a way that's statistically there, not just me just saying it. I mean, I think the eye test is more than enough to tell you that Luka has to do too much. But let's just take a look at some stats. Luka last year had the 10th highest usage percentage season in league history. The season before that was the 20th highest. The season before that was the 13th highest. And this season has been the 7th highest all-time usage percentage season ever. So every year, besides for his rookie year, we have seen one of the 20 highest usage seasons ever from Luka Doncic. This trend cannot continue. There needs to be more shot creators and connectors on this team, period. And what I mean by connectors is not necessarily players that can create their own offense, but guys who can make the right decision with the ball in their hands most of the time. The problem is very often decision making just as much as it is shot creation. And like there's, for example, like Boris Diaw, not really a shot creator, but a connector on the offensive end. Those players just really aren't existing on the Dallas Mavericks. There's very few connectors. It's bad. Now, there are changes you can make to improve right now. I have no doubt of that, and I have been suggesting them. I think that both Josh Green and Christian Wood should be starting, or at the very least getting 5 to 10 more minutes per game each. Jason Kidd needs to create a more complex offensive system with more moving parts, even if the playmaking ability of the role players on this team is rough. It's worth trying something other than just Luka go score. And to be fair, last year's Mavericks also did start the season 15-15 and then turned it around, so that could theoretically happen again. But if we continue this cycle of one step forward, one step back, you're going to be in constant purgatory, and Luka is going to get frustrated with that and leave. I actually really like the idea of Luka Doncic spending his career in Dallas. I think it's weirdly really sick that him and Dirk Nowitzki played together one year. I just like Luka in Dallas. I would like him to remain there, unless of course he wanted to come to the Chicago Bulls. But anyways, overall I like Luka where he's at. But I also am quite confident he will not continue to be there as this window gets smaller and smaller. And really, if there's any comparison to make with how the Mavericks have built around Luka, it actually reminds me a ton of another franchise that I have been super critical of, and that is the Portland Trail Blazers. The way that they have went about building around Damian Lillard over the last damn near decade is the same level of passiveness and not taking your situation for granted, rather, not taking it. The way that they have built around Dame has just been marginal move after marginal move, and only up until recently do I think they did a drastic enough of an overhaul to be acceptable. Same thing with the Mavericks. They are continuing to play with fire in a way that where the difference between these two teams is that Damian Lillard is super duper loyal, and I don't know about that with Luka Doncic. His body language really suggests that he just cannot handle this constant losing that's been happening, and it's very indicative to me of the fact that I just don't think that he is going to tolerate a terrible team around him forever. And I don't think it's really his fault. I've seen some weird takes suggesting it's his fault that the roster is the way that it is, but not really, man. Like, I'm sure he's had some sway in the decisions, but the roster frankly hasn't dramatically changed enough for me to really suggest that. Like, it's been like Dorian Finney-Smith and Maxi Kleber, and those have been the consistent pieces around, and like Dwight Powell's been there the whole time. Tim Hardaway Jr. was there very shortly. It's a pretty similar roster that we've seen with him year in and year out. Luka is one of my favorite players, and I would like to see him in ideal circumstances rather than having to carry an offense every single night and ultimately fall short despite his best efforts. So yeah, there's some thoughts on the Mavericks and Luka Doncic. Shout out to Rudy for editing this video, and goodbye.